Hi, this is Stephen Van Kampen-Lewis, and it is July 21st, probably around close to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I wanted to start talking a little bit more about my Cattleyas. I've got a bunch of videos on Catacetums. In fact, I've got 3 up, and then I just made a 4th, but many of you out there in YouTube land probably don't know that Cattleyas are actually my first orchid love, and still my primary focus. I'm a big fan of species, and I talked a little bit about that when I made the Cattleya nobilior video. Um, but I want to show you how I grow my Cattleyas, and to talk a little bit about their love of light and heat. There are folks online who will talk about heat and what it means for a plant to be too hot or to grow in conditions that are too hot. I want to let you know that it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit right now, and that's pretty common for this time of year here in Central Texas. Most of my Cattleyas are behind me here, and I've got a few that I've pulled out from the cage behind me. You may be wondering actually what that cage is. That cage was originally to keep out deer before I fenced in my yard, but it also turns out that it keeps my young children's fingers away from my plants as well. So that's why I've left it up. And it'll probably come down here in a couple years when my kids get older than they are now. But much like the Catacetums, the Cattleya group, um, the more commonly grown ones are often able to really handle hot temperatures, and 100 degrees Fahrenheit is not a problem for these guys. And I will start off by showing you a compot that I've got. This is Cattleya Vixy. It's Pink Cloud by Mercedes. This was a flask I got from Brian Monk, and it's from his breeding. I got this, I honestly don't even know when, probably maybe a year ago at the most. But as you can see, these guys are just cranking. They absolutely love it. I've got the Eco Web down below, and then sort of a thin layer of sphagnum on top that holds in pretty good moisture. They get watered just about every day when it's 100 degrees. The sun is very bright in the east, and then around midday, the shade of the oak trees takes over, and so it's fairly bright. But you can see, I mean, back here it's almost full sun here at 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and they're just fine with that. You're not going to want to throw a plant out that was indoors for its whole life, and then you put it outside in July under these kinds of conditions. You really want to acclimate them and get them out as early as possible. Here in Texas, it's mid-March typically is when I kick my orchids outside, and I'm not worried about another freeze, or beginning of April at the very latest. And at that time of the year, the sun is quite a bit weaker than it is, of course, now here in mid-July. So as the sun gets stronger and stronger, the Cattleyas and the other types of orchids that I have back there get used to that bright sunshine heat. Like this compot of Cattleya Vixy. So if conditions were poor, these young plants wouldn't be doing well. They've got nice hard leaves, they've got time-release fertilizer in there, and they're doing really well. I expect to get these probably in pots, certainly this time next year, maybe even a little bit before then. We'll see. Speaking of young plants, I have a Cattleya Vixy or Varsavixii, depending on your pronunciation. This is from Fred Clark. This is from his breeding. This is a semi-alba by a semi-alba, and this will be the first bloom that I have on this particular plant, so I'm pretty excited. You can see I'm getting 2 blooms for this particular plant's first time. I'm a little worried about the sort of dents here in the flower on this particular flower, but hopefully this one is fine. I don't know what those dents are on these buds. I doubt it's mechanical damage, but who knows what happens out here at night. Most likely, well, I don't know. I'll update you with what these particular flowers look like. Another thing that I want to show you is it's blooming on this newest growth. While I do have another growth coming in right back here, it's not large enough to put out any kind of spike or even sheath. But I'm going to tilt this down, and maybe you can see that the roots on this guy are starting to come in. So, a lot of different Cattleya species put out the new roots at different times compared to other Cattleya species. Some Cattleyas will put out the roots as the new growth is just coming out. Some will put out new roots as the growth is getting larger. These guys like to put out the roots when the plant is, or excuse me, the new growth is more mature. Another thing that I want to point out is you may have noticed that this unifoliate species has 2 leaves on this newest growth, which is not unusual for younger plants. Some of the unifoliates will put out 2 leaves under exceptionally good conditions, and I think it's just if they have the right light, nutrients, warmth mixture, they'll put out an extra leaf, especially when they're young. And the same thing can happen for bifoliates. The next plant that I'm going to show you is a bifoliate, but a lot of the growths have 3 leaves. So it's very happy. They really like it. I'm growing almost all of my larger plants in large grade Orchiata bark, clay pots. They breathe well. I water them every day. And, life is good for these guys. So the second leaf was an interesting, it didn't come out as a leaf. It started as a normal sheath. So this is the typical leaf. The sheath came up. It was kind of large, but I didn't think anything of it. And then it kept growing. It just kept going and going, and then it opened and became this sort of weird leaf-shaped sheath that is neither one of them. But in any case, it's a happy blooming plant, and I'm excited to show you these blooms. It's a Sunday now. I anticipate next Sunday I'll be making the video showing you those blooms. So, yay. This particular plant is an absolute stunner. It is Cattleya Zachary Hodes, which is a primary hybrid between Violacea and Harrisoniana. Now, this particular plant, when I was buying it at the nursery as a large seedling, I noticed that it had some red on the leaves, and that can be an indication of what the flowers will look like. But maybe even more importantly than that are the root tips. The root tips and sometimes the leaves will give you an indication of the anthocyanins within the plant and what the flowers might look like. And this is long before their blooming size. So let's say you have a tray of seedlings, you're at a nursery, you see a bunch of seedlings from a plant that you want. Which one do I grab? Do I grab the largest? Do I grab the smallest? Do I grab someone in between? I like to look at the leaves and the root tips. And if you see one that it has a different color than all the rest, there's a really good chance that the flowers will be different. So if you're looking at a flat of seedlings and all of the leaves are bright red, so it's getting lots of light, it's really happy, and then you see a seedling or two that maybe there's no red, that might be an alba, whereas all of its siblings could be, the typical coloration, or vice versa. Let's say you see a flat that's supposed to be an alba, and none of them really have anthocyanins in the leaves, which you would expect for an alba or an albino. And you see one with bright red leaves, there's a good chance that the one with bright red leaves will be a different color than all of its siblings. And why I say that is this particular plant, I don't know if it really shows up for you on the camera, but the root tips are just this intense neon red. And so when this one bloomed last year, I had the idea that it might be a rubra, and it turns out I was right. It's one of the most striking colored plants I've ever seen. I'm really excited to see it bloom again. But strangely enough, it's growing up and sort of away from the pot. So I tucked this piece of oak underneath the new growths. As you can see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 new growths, and they're getting to the point where they're fairly mature. You know, this has 2 leaves. This one has 3 leaves and a sheath coming out. This one has 3 leaves, so it's not unusual, again, especially for younger plants, to throw an extra leaf on their growths. It doesn't mean something bad. In fact, I've found that typically means the plant is really, really happy. And so what I've shown you is 3 groups of plants, all of which are fairly young and would not be doing well under 100-degree temperatures if they didn't like it, if it was somehow harmful. So, you know, it really depends on your growing conditions, but there's a really good chance that if you have high temperatures, it's not a problem. You know, if you're sitting in your greenhouse and you're spending a bunch of money trying to get those temperatures down to 85, let it get up to 90 or 95 degrees, and as long as you have good air movement and your plants are drying off, I think everything will be a-okay. Before I leave you, I do want to show you some of the other plants. I guess just generally, it's just a couple of tables that I've got put together. So these very tall ones are Cattleya glosses. They're massive. The pots, you know, the pot is about this big, and that plant is, I repotted it last year into that massive pot, and it's already outgrowing it. I'm probably going to leave it. The newest growth right here, as you can see, is at the pot edge. This is the whole thing. Cattleya glosses are one of my favorites. I absolutely love it. I love the scent. I love the way the flowers look. That particular individual is one of Roy Tokunaga's plants from H&R. Just absolutely beautiful. But if you're space limited, do not buy Cattleya glossa, or at least do not buy polyploid glosses. They're much, much, much larger than the diploid glosses, which if you're only somewhat space limited, I would stick to the diploid individuals as opposed to the polyploid individuals, and that's a whole other video, so I'm not going to get into that. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, I suggest just Googling it and maybe getting some background. But with that, I'm going to sign off until, I guess, next week when I show you an update video, hopefully on this Cattleya Vixy, and it will be a bloom video. Bye.